Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. We're back for a non-Q&A video, Steve and I together.
Bit special?
Yeah, a bit special. We thought, we've been doing a few best of videos towards the end of the year. I think we've got a best monitors video and we've got the best CPUs video. And I think you did some Z690 stuff as well, which I guess will count here as well.
Why not?
But we thought, it doesn't really make too much sense to do a best GPUs video because this year has been, a rather terrible year when it comes to graphics card releases. Everything that's come out has just been too expensive, no availability. So telling you guys, hey, the 3070 Ti was the best GPU of the year or whatever it may be. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It'd be pretty ridiculous. So we thought, this was still a GPU generation that's worth remembering and talking about in some way because we've had, the performance uplifts that we've got this generation from both companies has been pretty good.
And it's the first generation where we've had competition across the board.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just, hey, in the high end, NVIDIA, this is the NVIDIA GPU you should buy. There's been products all the way down to the $300 MSRPs from both companies. It's been very interesting. So we thought instead of doing like a best GPUs video, we should look and sort of compare Ampere and RDNA2 at each price bracket from the very high end, the stupidly expensive cards, right down to what should normally be mid-range GPUs, and sort of think about what were the best releases in those categories and sort of just go back and forth a little bit about, just comparing the two products and sort of summarize a little bit the Ampere and RDNA2 generations.
We'll start with, so we have obviously the fastest Radeon GPU was the 6900 XT, so the Radeon RX 6900 XT. And then out of the gate, we got the GeForce RTX 3090.
Yep.
So I guess we'll start with that comparison. We won't throw the 3080 Ti in there just yet because that complicates things. Disclaimer, I said both of them were dumb products that shouldn't really exist. They're just there to price gouge either fans of either company or people who just want the best no matter what because they can afford it, so therefore they want the best, which I suppose is fine, I guess, if that's what you want to do. So we've got those two products. So keeping that in mind that they're those type of products, which one is better? Which one makes, out of two products that make no sense, which one makes the most sense or more sense, and which one ultimately won that category?
So I guess if you're talking my opinion, based on your testing, I think the 6900 XT makes less sense to buy. I think the 3090, while again, the performance uplift over the 3080 is very small.
Laughably small, yeah.
At least it does give you double the VRAM. More than double the VRAM by going up to 24 gig, which does make the card more useful for some workstation type workloads. So you can kind of justify the card from that perspective by saying, if you are doing rendering tasks and you don't want to buy very expensive, what used to be Quadro and now just RTX A series type products and those sort of things, then the 3090 kind of makes sense. It is also the more powerful card at higher resolutions, which again, I think strengthens my point that the 6900 XT makes less sense because if you are spending just a ton of money, you should be spending it to buy the most powerful card, and that's what the 3090 is.
I think that's the best way to put it. And also, even if you look at it inside of an Nvidia bubble and then an AMD bubble, so we look at the 6900 XT relative to the 6800 XT.
Yep.
Get a few more cores. What is it? What's the performance bump like? I don't even remember now. It's like it's very small.
Yep.
Somewhere in the range of 5 to maybe 10%. Somewhere in there, I believe is accurate. The point is, in cost per frame, it didn't make sense.
Yep.
And there is nothing else to be gained from getting a 600 XT other than the fact that you can tell people you have a 600 XT. And if you love AMD, you're like, hey, I have the fastest AMD Radeon GPU, and that means something to me. So that's great. On the GeForce side of things, it is a bit different because, as you say, you get the more VRAM. So not only are you getting some more cores, you are getting substantially more than double the VRAM capacity.
Yep.
So although that's not particularly useful for gaming, at least to date, you've got it.
Yeah, it's an extra benefit.
So it's a bragging right product. And I think this is where a lot of the AMD fans got a bit lost on our take on this, because you have to just stop and go. These products do not make sense. Don't try and make them make sense. Neither of them make sense. Doesn't matter if it's AMD or Nvidia. They are Halo products designed to maximize profits.
Yep.
So what extra do they give? As we said, with the Radeon GPU, basically nothing. With the GeForce GPU, basically nothing with some extra VRAM. So you've got that. There's something extra there. And yeah, it is $500 US more expensive. But again, price, I failed to get this across in my reviews. The price at this point is irrelevant, not only because pricing and MSRPs are irrelevant, but because you're already like, well, I don't care about cost per frame. I want to go to the point of diminishing returns and then run so far past it you can no longer see me. So whether it's $1,000 or $1,500, it doesn't matter. What I'm interested in is being able to put RTX 3090 in my tag so I can tell everyone I've got the best.
I got the fastest GPU.
Yeah, I mean,
there were some benefits. The 6900 XT is the faster card for 1080p gaming, which is why I think you've switched over to using it for your
can be,
CPU testing.
yeah.
So that is kind of one benefit. Again, the price doesn't really matter, and it is good to see AMD competing more at the high end. So from that perspective, it is good to see that we do now have a product that gets very close to Nvidia's best product, but ultimately
very impressive. Yeah,
it wasn't actually faster.
It wasn't
at
faster.
The resolutions that you would most likely use.
Definitely wasn't faster at 4K. Wasn't really faster at 1440p. It depends on the games. They're so competitive there, and ultimately doesn't matter. Like, yeah, if you're comparing them head to head, 4K advantage to GeForce, much better ray tracing support if you care about that. DLSS as a bonus. It obviously has FSR anyway because that's an open thing, and more VRAM.
Yeah, so I think the 3090.
The 3090
takes that category. And then
the only disadvantage is the higher price, which is the most irrelevant thing of all of the things we spoke of.
Yeah, and if you were a high roller type person looking to buy the most expensive GPU, but you for some reason didn't want to buy the most expensive GPU, I guess that's where the 3080 Ti comes in. Being that sort of weird product where it still doesn't make sense compared to a 3080 because it's too expensive.
That's right.
But it's also not the fastest card, so it kind of falls in that 6900 XT category.
It does, yeah. Because it's kind of I don't know if it's worse than the 6900 because it does have more VRAM than the card beneath it. It's got 2 gigabytes more. But it's even dumber than the 3090 because if the MSRP was a thing, it's not much cheaper, but it has half the VRAM. So what's the point?
Yeah.
So the 3080 Ti was the ultimate pointless product, released at a really bad time, but it helped Nvidia extend. Basically, they were like, the 3080 is too cheap, so we'll make a 3080 Ti and make significantly more money. That's our technical and well thought out analysis of RDNA2 versus Ampere at the $1,000 plus price range. So now that we've got that out of the way.
Yeah, let's do next up. We've got the sort of what should have been the sort of $700, the high-end sensible card price, which would be the RTX 3080 from Nvidia. And then from AMD, you've got the 6800 XT. And I guess we kind of also have to count the 6800 here because, again, I think you got the 6700 XT and the 3070 in the lower tier. The 6800 is kind of that.
So that's $580, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so. So we're kind of looking at the...
It's so weird not revisiting these products and doing reviews. It's like I'm trying to recall my original review to get the information.
Yeah, exactly. So I think those 3 cards sort of ended up I mean, the 6800 is kind of that transitionary product between the two categories, but at the end of the day, the 6800 XT and 3080 were kind of the big competitors in these sort of price tiers. And
well, at 4K again, the 3080 was slightly more powerful, at least based on my day one review. And again, we haven't done a lot of head-to-head follow-up content. I think I did a big benchmark video shortly after they were released. And 4K advantage Nvidia, 1440p, it's like much of a muchness, and then 1080p generally goes in favor of the Radeon GPU, which is probably a less significant win there. So performance, though, they are very similar.
Yeah.
And then price, they're meant to be similar, but again, so the only advantage that the Radeon GPU gets is the extra 6 gigabytes of VRAM, 16 gigabytes versus 10. How important that is, well, it depends. But the advantages the GeForce GPU have, again, is significantly more mature and, as a result, better performing ray tracing and DLSS.
Yeah, and I think it's those two factors that would ultimately make me swing towards the 3080. I think if the 6800 XT was cheaper than it was, which
like
was
if it was 600 US.
yeah, I think AMD priced it too close. And I think what we've seen over this year has been that we're seeing more games with ray tracing support come out. And while, yeah, some of these newer titles, things like Far Cry 6, for example, do have ray tracing that does still run well on AMD products, ultimately you still are getting the better ray tracing experience on a 3080. And I think if you're buying in that sort of higher tier, you are expecting to use the card for longer because it's more expensive. And over the lifespan of that sort of card, I think you'd be pretty right in saying that more games are going to use ray tracing. It's going to become a more important feature throughout the lifespan of that card. So I think that for me, and the benefit of DLSS, kind of negates the extra VRAM. I think that 10 gigabytes on the 3080 is enough for this generation. It should have been more. It should have been more.
I don't want to conclude that it's enough for this generation just yet. It definitely should have been more, but it is what it is. And I think it being what it is, I still think it is the better product and the one I would get out of those two.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Again, it's kind of hard to make these discussions as well when pricing is kind of part of it. And I think what we have seen throughout the year is that the actual price of the 6800 XT has been cheaper than the 3080 in terms of if you did want to go and buy one. But even then, prices are so inflated and stuff that ultimately you're spending a lot of money either way. And in these high tier categories where you're sort of tossing up, I think I would still swing towards buying the product that is better in terms of performance.
It's like we say if it was $600 US and the 3080 was $700 US.
Yep.
For those that are more concerned with value, I'd recommend the 6800 XT if it was 600. And then if it's more you want to try out ray tracing and all that stuff, then you'll get the more expensive product. But when it's like this one's 2,100 and this one's 2,300, it's like it becomes irrelevant then. You probably go with the card with more features or you don't buy anything at all if you can.
But I think this product segment where we're sort of looking at these cards is the most competitive of all of the segments. I think these two products
definitely
ultimately are very close, and certainly people that have bought a 6800 XT throughout the last year would have been very happy with it. I think especially now that we've got a more clear idea of how ray tracing performance stacks up, it was still pretty hard to make a call back when these products launched because we just didn't have the volume of ray tracing games available. We were making calls based on, like, I think Watch Dogs had just launched around that time, and there was
effectively game work type games, and
we were using was Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition around that time as well. I can't.
But basically,
remember.
The situation hasn't improved much.
Yeah, I think if anything, we've seen some games where ray tracing does work reasonably well on AMD cards, which is kind of tempered it a little bit, but obviously the performance is still superior on Nvidia cards. Whereas I think back when the cards launched, it was looking pretty dire when people were comparing it in Control, for example, where AMD GPUs were terrible in performance compared to Nvidia. Whereas now, the more modern titles, it's still advantage Nvidia, but not the same level that we were seeing initially. So
not always anyway.
Yeah, not always. So. But again, I think, it's a very competitive category. And the 6800, where does that slot in? It's kind of like the value 6800 XT, but sort of the more powerful than its 3070.
Yeah.
Very odd.
Yeah, it was in a bit of an odd position. I think my thoughts there were, if they were both $500, I think the Radeon GPU would be a no-brainer for me. Especially if you keep up for a few years, maybe.
It was a fair bit faster than the 3070 for rasterization.
It's a little. Well, it's faster. I don't know how much. Depends how you define it. It's a bit faster. It's not miles faster, but it depends on the game. It was fast
enough that if they were both the same price, then you would have gone with the AMD card.
At that price point, I'd be more drawn towards the Radeon offering.
Yeah, I still think the 6800 was too expensive. Certainly, I think you'd have a very fair point if they were the same price.
Yeah.
But I think AMD was a little bit optimistic with charging, at least coming out of the gate with it being $580. Whereas, if they were the same price, then it would have been fair. And I think that's been reflected by the very low volumes of 6800s that we've seen. Obviously, that's also been partly a supply constraint, but the 6800 I think has been probably the least sought after GPU from AMD's lineup, and certainly people have gone either way, and I think that's only been exacerbated when the 3070 Ti came out, which is, again, that was sitting at $600, which was $20 more than the 6800, and also had the same 8GB VRAM as the 3070, which was a problem. But again, I think a lot of people ended up going for that product because of it being faster for things like ray tracing and also having DLSS support. So
top 5 style video in mind, assuming a normal market, so MSRP is relevant.
yep.
Who wins for you?
Well, it's hard for me to say because we haven't yet talked about the 6700 XT as well, which is more of a competitor for the 3070. I think before the 3070 Ti came out, the 6800 is probably the card that I would have been slightly more interested in.
Yeah,
but I'm talking like 1% more interested in. But since the 3070 Ti came out, which itself isn't that great of a product,
No.
I think it's enabled a more easy comparison between the two products, being that they're very similar in price. And for me, I probably would go with the 3070 Ti, but again, it's hard to say. It's a very competitive segment again, and I think the conversation is probably a bit different once we include the 6700 XT. But yeah,
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think initially I probably would have gone towards the 6800, but then the 3070 Ti, which
again, the 3070 Ti isn't a great value card compared to the 3070 because its cost per frame is worse, but then it does sort of sit in that. It's a very awkward position. I think that $600 price point. It's kind of.
I think I'd probably still go the 6800 over the 3070 Ti because it's just a more expensive card with still 8GB of VRAM.
Yeah.
But again, we'll have to see how that all pans out throughout next year, I guess.
So I guess the next segment, the most important thing, and I guess kind of the most, exciting price bracket has sort of been the RTX 3070 versus the 6700 XT. It's kind of been hard to go through these categories because some of the time these products have competed with other products that are high tiers and sometimes not.
Well, we're going off the MSRP.
But yeah, these are two very similar. Well, they're similar from both a performance and a price perspective. So the MSRP for the 3070 was $500. The 6700 XT was $480. So they were both supposed to be roughly the same price. And as it turns out, the 6700 XT was slightly slower than the 3070 in terms of the performance that you saw in the day one review, which again,
it's like a 6800 XT versus RTX 3080 thing all over again, because you've got AMD only slightly cheaper but basically the same in terms of cost per frame.
Yes.
So they're pretty much even there, but then it lacks, the ray tracing performance of the 6700 XT is terrible. Whereas the 3070 can, dabble.
It's capable.
It's capable for sure.
If you're playing today's games like Guardians of the Galaxy on a 3070 at a reasonable, you get the benefit of DLSS there as well. I think you're coming away with a better experience than what you'd see on the 6700 XT, which
I think is what it boils down to. So the advantage, which is the same thing we see with the 600 XT versus RTX 3080, 4GB more VRAM for the Radeon GPU. You go up from 8 to 12, which is certainly a much better spot to be at.
Yep.
Really, 12 is the minimum for a mid-range card, in my opinion, where we're at right now. So I think the Radeon GPU is more balanced and will probably be the superior product in a year or two's time, but that is entirely a guess on my behalf. If we work in the here and now, I think the RTX product, the 3070, is the better buy.
Yeah, and I think this is another situation of AMD, kind of like in the other price tiers, of trying to be too competitive with the price. And I think we're seeing this throughout the RDNA2 generation, is that AMD thinks that they have a product that is at the level of the GeForce cards in terms of its overall package. So they think, hey, we can compete with this on price, but ultimately they're actually only competing on one part of the performance. And when you look at the overall package that the two products provide, Nvidia does have the lead with features, with things like ray tracing and DLSS, which makes, again, I guess the 6700 XT, in my opinion, should have been cheaper than it was to get the sales that might have occurred were the market normal. And I think the saving grace for the 6700 XT this generation, if we sort of ignore the future-proofing VRAM side of things for now, because we can't really foresee that for now, and I think people buying now, like you say, probably were better off with the 3070. in this current market, with the actual prices that we see, the 6700 XT is notably cheaper than the 3070 on the scalper market and at most retailers. And the volumes of 6700 XTs has been pretty good. So I think from that perspective, AMD, in the market that we've currently had, has been able to make a product that, in my opinion, is worth buying for a lot of people in the current market with how expensive 3070s have become. Whereas if we're in a normal market, I think they'd actually find it much tougher to sell that product. Yeah,
they'd probably have to do a price cut type deal, which they often knock $50 off or whatever, and then it becomes quite appealing.
Yeah, so I think that's probably where those two cards end up. And again, a lot of it comes down to that ray tracing and DLSS feature add that Nvidia's been able to have this generation.
I think, again, it's important to emphasize that regardless of which one you think is the superior product, no matter how passionately you feel that, there's really no right or wrong answer there. They're both very competitive, similar price, or should be similar price products, and they both perform really well for the MSRP.
It's very different to the 5700 XT versus 2070 series that we got previously, where AMD was much more aggressive with the price. So I think back then, if we were making this video comparing Turing versus RDNA1, we would have been very clearly saying that the 5700 XT was the better value buy. Obviously, these days, not having ray tracing on that particular card is probably stinging a bit. But this generation, AMD has tried to be much more competitive on pricing, which, again, has sort of hurt them at times.
Okay, so next in line would be the 6600 XT. A product I kind of don't like, spoiler alert, and the RTX 3060 Ti.
Yes, and these two products I think are fairly, well, at least at launch, they were fairly evenly matched, because we had the 3060 Ti, which came first and was priced at $400, and then the 6600 XT came in at $380, MSRP, of course. So in a normal market, these two products were supposed to go head-to-head.
Yes.
It's ended up a bit different, but I think if we first focus on, sort of the segment that they occupy.
So the GeForce GPU is $20 more. It is faster. In terms of cost per frame at the MSRP, the GeForce GPU is slightly better value based on my 12-game day one review. So that's advantage GeForce right off the bat. I think, should we compare them at the mythical MSRP first and give our opinions on who won there?
Yeah, I think so, because that's where both companies intended to make those products.
So I think I'll give my opinion first this time. For me, it's an easy win for Nvidia. At those price points, $20 more for a faster card that turns out to be better in terms of cost per frame. Again, the same old stuff. Ray tracing better, DLSS support good. Easy win there. It's a particularly easy win because the 3060 Ti is a PCI Express 4.0 x 16 product, whereas the Radeon GPU is a PCI Express 4.0 x 8 product. So when used in a PCI Express 4.0 system, not too much of a big deal. Performance as expected. When you put them in a PCIe 3.0 system, can be a bit of a problem. So can start to get a bit bandwidth starved, especially at the higher resolutions. So don't like that. So that's another nail in the coffin. If it was much cheaper, then I could put up with that. But so that's my take on the MSRP comparison.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And I think if we were in that normal market where we had MSRP pricing, the 3060 Ti would be, in my opinion, the best product from this generation. It's not that much slower than a 3070. And it's and you're getting that for $100 less.
Not much slower than the previous generation RTX 2080 Ti, which was
exactly. So
whatever.
That was shaping up to be an excellent product from a value perspective, and obviously, the performance is good. And I think the VRAM amount that you get with that card, which is 8 gig, the same as the 3070, makes more sense in the $400 price tier. Ideally we get more still, but I
think 12 should be the minimum there, but it's obviously more justifiable because you come down $100.
It's more justifiable. So, from my perspective, the 3060 Ti was a really good product from Nvidia, and it has turned out as well that the LHR cards have been one of the more successful products at fighting off the scalpers recently. But this discussion changes a lot when we look at what we've actually got throughout the year, where the 6600 XT has been substantially cheaper. It's something like I think we were just looking at it like almost like over $900 for a 3060 Ti in the scalper market versus below $700 for the 6600 XT. So in terms of real pricing that you guys have been able to buy throughout the lifespan of those products, the 6600 XT I think is much better value. I mean, I think you can overlook the issues with the PCIe.
That's a big price difference.
Yeah, it's a big price difference. It's almost tier below. Like at that price, you're almost starting to compare 3060 Ti to the 6700 XT.
It's half what they should have cost.
Yeah.
So MSRP, we both think the 3060 Ti is the better product.
I think it easily would have won that battle.
Easily would have won. I mean, I think we're both on the same page there. In reality, given the quite substantial difference in price, if it was our money, we'd purchase the much cheaper 6600 XT. Is that where we're heading with this?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah, I think that price difference is significant enough to justify. Yeah, I guess that shows sort of how this generation has been going for a lot of these cards. It's like,
I'm not sure who won that.
yeah, it's like in a normal market, one company wins, but then in the current market, it kind of flips on its head a little bit.
Yeah, it's like a kind of a bitter win because it's like, yay, $700 for that product.
And I guess that brings us to the final category that we've got for now, considering we don't have entry-level GPUs yet, so the mainstream GPUs. But this would be the RTX 3060 compared to the RX 6600, so the non-XT model. I believe both of these GPUs were priced at the same MSRP at launch, so $330 US. And I think that came across as not a very favorable comparison for AMD in your launch day review when you were sort of talking about the MSRP stuff, because the 6600 is slower than the RTX 3060.
Yeah, it's kind of got everything going against it. It's slower. It's got the PCI Express issue again.
It has less VRAM as well, because that enigma where Nvidia made the 3060 a 12 gig card, despite the 3070 and 3060 Ti being 8 gig.
So 4 gigabytes less VRAM, slower, worse in terms of cost per frame because of that. So it's just an all-around worse product. Yeah, obviously again, ray tracing not as good, no DLSS. So yeah, that was that was a bad matchup for AMD, that one.
Yeah, I think at those sort of MSRPs, it really seemed like the 6600 should have been competing in a tier below the 3060. I think the MSRPs, because there was a significant time difference between the two launches, you kind of got AMD launching in a totally different GPU market than what Nvidia was planning for, which I think explains some of that price difference. But normally you would say that the 3060 should have been competing with the 6600 XT model, and the 6600 would have been a lower tier product.
Yeah, like 250 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that was sort of the design goals for those products. It certainly doesn't match up from a hardware perspective, and their pricing is not justified at all. So if they had come out with that price, it would have been ridiculous. But then again, I don't think they would have if the market was normal. It would have been a sub $300 card, I would have guessed. So kind of like what we saw with the high product tier that we were just looking at, the actual price of the 6600 was lower than the 3060 for most of this year by 100 to 150 US. You're looking at like 700 to 750 for the 3060 and slightly below 600 for the 6600. So you end up with this situation again where the 6600 is cheaper, but does that make it worth buying?
I mean, you'd really have to twist my arm to get me to buy either of those products at that price. But I guess given no choice, it's like, what do you do? I don't know. It doesn't seem like enough of a discount to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd be almost with you on that. I think the 3060 is a more compelling hardware product. But again, it depends on the budget that you have. They kind of have ended up in those two different pricing segments, because the 6600 XT was almost around that price of the 3060 at actual. As
a buyer at those performance tiers, I'm a lot less concerned with ray tracing performance.
Yes.
I'm not too concerned with ray tracing there. DLSS, obviously still a bit of a big deal. I guess with the price discrepancy there in the real world market, you could go either way justifiably. But the Radeon GPU is not the obvious choice given the discount for me.
Yeah, I think the discount will need to be a little bit more. But again, it's another one of those situations where AMD has sort of, if this was a normal market, wouldn't have been particularly competitive in these lower price tiers.
No, not at all.
And in fact, almost across their entire lineup, it seems like we've constantly been talking about, the 6800 XT should have been a little bit cheaper than the 3080, and then we've gone all the way down to this tier where it's almost gotten like it's definitely worse. The pricing of these lower tier cards is not at all competitive at MSRP.
And I think they thought that maybe because ray tracing is less of a selling point, that they don't have to account for it as much. But
and the different launch timeframes I think plays a lot into those.
It would for sure.
The 6600 launched just recently, whereas the 3060 was the start of this year. So that massive discrepancy means they want to price it up and all of that. But I think the real pricing has been more of a fair reflection of where these cards sit in terms of what I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Paying.
Yeah, it's like the market's corrected for it.
Yeah, the market has corrected for it, and of course part of that is because those cards tend to have lower mining performance as well from AMD than the Nvidia cards, which
5700 XT costs more than the 6700 XT.
But
so in summary, from a sort of performance tier evaluation, roughly taking MSRP into account, it looks like overall Ampere was more of a winner than RDNA2, but RDNA2 is mighty competitive and certainly a very viable alternative at pretty much every price point.
Yeah, I think as a summary across all the price points, that's probably pretty fair. I think from a hardware perspective, Ampere is more impressive with its features, its ray tracing support, and the only real knock you could say from just purely hardware is that a lot of the cards have too little VRAM. Yeah. As we've gone down most of the tiers, apart from the 3090, they've always been short on the level of VRAM.
That was the big mess for sure there.
Yeah, the 3060 aside as well, 12 gig is fine for that card. But really those middle tier cards should have had 12 gig plus. Whereas with RDNA2, I think there's been more knocks on those cards, specifically, the lack of a DLSS alternative. Obviously FSR sort of tried to do that, but it's also available on Nvidia cards, so how much of a competition advantage is that?
It had to kill DLSS off to nullify that advantage. It just hasn't done that yet.
And then obviously the lower ray tracing performance at every product tier has hurt them as well, and the advantage there being the higher VRAM capacity. So but I guess despite those features, despite Ampere being a better hardware product, RDNA2 is far more competitive than the previous products that we've seen from AMD. I think that's still important to remember and note with this generation.
Yep.
And then, you get to the pricing discussion, and it's kind of, AMD cards been a bit too expensive throughout most of the tiers, but then the market has kind of corrected for that throughout the year and made them sort of quite reasonable buys in some of those price points. But again, it's so hard to talk about pricing when all the pricing is horrible.
Been the biggest challenge with day one reviews for sure. It's like, how do you even approach this? So, and it's not going to get easier with anytime soon, but it's just something we have to deal with. So that's kind of it. That's our summary of how they've compared at each sort of performance tier, each price point, if you will. I don't know if our picks will surprise you guys, or it's pretty much expected based on our day one content. Again, it's a bit weird not having done a lot of updated stuff. Like usually by this time of year, we would have got all the new games like Far Cry 6 and Battlefields and Halo and a heap of other games, and done a big, huge performance breakdown, really assessing price, performance, the whole lot. We'd know exactly where everything sits. But for obvious reasons, I haven't poured, countless days and weeks into doing all that updated testing. Maybe something we'll revisit early next year just to find out where everything has sort of settled. But I don't think it's going to be too different to what we saw in the day one reviews and a couple of the big benchmarks that we did straight after.
Yeah, I think with these discussions as well, it's so hard to talk about where the products sit. And I think you would have seen throughout this video a lot of us changing our recommendations when we look at the original prices versus the current prices, because it's just so hard. And I think I was seeing a little bit of this on the recent video I did doing the monitor tier list, where people were sort of saying, why did you include the pricing in that discussion? And it's because the pricing is so important for these products. If we were sitting here and just saying, let's compare the 3080 to the RX 6800 XT, it's like if you're just making the assumption that they're compared against each other, you kind of have that reference point of price to make that comparison make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it always becomes difficult with these discussions when pricing isn't too much of a part of it. But yeah, I think overall, yeah, hopefully that was a good summary of this generation. Yeah.
Well, it's our summary.
It's our summary. And
good or bad, it's our summary.
And yeah, there's still a few more products to launch that we're expecting in the first quarter or two of next year. That will sort of round out that lower price categories, sort of the what should have been $200 GPUs, but will end up being $500 GPUs. So fun times ahead there.
Definitely.
But yeah.
But other than that, I don't think there's too much more to say on this one. We've probably been going long enough. It's probably been quite a long video knowing us. So end it there.
I think we'll end it there.
Tim reckons end it there. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, especially if you made it this far, 20% club and all that.
Yep.
Float Plane, Patreon, we have those things. If you want to sign up, you can get in our Discord chat and chat to Tim and myself about whatever. Live streams, which we do each month. Q&As, behind the scenes content, a lot of cool stuff there. So if you're interested, check it out. But if not, perfectly fine. And we would like to thank you for watching this video.
I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.